My father has just invited me out to lunch at a restaurant in an expensive block of K Street. And this is only strange if you know a couple of things. One is that my father and I are not the lunching sort of father and son. And the other is that my dad's idea of a splurge is Red Lobster. And I happen to know that there are no restaurants in the Red Lobster price range in this part of K Street. So I don't know what's up, but I say sure. I love my dad, but we have never been especially close. Growing up, I was afraid of him. He didn't spank me often, but the few times he did were so terrifying that I wet my pants. At the same time, I loved the guy. One of my fondest memories is of a time, I couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, and we're walking down the aisle of a grocery store back in the days when they had those open waist-high chest freezers. And without breaking stride or saying a word, he picks me up and lays me down among the frozen peas and carrots and keeps walking. And I begin to giggle uncontrollably. For one thing, I know he's coming back. And for another, I recognize this as the most spontaneous, goofy, pure expression of joy in the sheer fact of my existence that I've ever experienced. So you have all the makings of a pretty good Oedipal soap opera here, because this is the man I both love and fear, whose approval I crave above anyone else's on earth, but never feel like I'm quite good enough. I remember him looking at my 6th grade report card. I don't get it, Bill. If I had your brains, I'd be setting the world on fire. And I realize now that this was his somewhat ham-fisted way of trying to motivate me. But at the time, all I could think was, how do you impress somebody who could be a better version of you than you could? And so I froze him out. I was angry at him. I learned how to use silence like a knife. My dad was from 5 generations of career military men, West Pointers, and had himself been a naval fighter pilot. He was extroverted and outgoing, and he saw the world in black and white, and he never doubted for a second but that he was on the side of right. By the time I was a young adolescent, I, like any adolescent, had no fucking clue who I was. But I'd already begun to suspect that I wasn't cut from the same cloth he was, and that I was more like my mother, who was an extreme introvert, creative, artistic, but also a chronic worrier and oversensitive to criticism. I don't think these last 2 traits particularly bothered my father in a wife who was, after all, what's the word? Female. On the other hand, I always felt that if he'd ever had a kit from which to construct the ideal son, which I always thought would have made a great gift for him, these would not have been his first choice. And it was actually reassuring to me when other people noted how different we were, because it meant I wasn't crazy. I'll never forget my best friend in high school saying, as only a 16-year-old boy could, I don't know, man. I look at your dad, and I look at you, and I just can't believe you popped out of his dick one night. Now, this isn't how I would have worded it, but I sort of had the same feeling sometimes. But there's no anti-inflammatory like time. And after I'd graduated from college and was off on my own, I would sometimes go over to my parents for Sunday dinner. And everything was completely different. The iceberg had flipped. And my father and I were like two old veterans from opposing armies, meeting long after the conflict was over. Just happy to see each other. Just happy to see someone who understood what we'd been through and who had survived. We forgave each other, but I'm still not sure what's up with lunch. So I get to the restaurant, and he's already there, and as soon as I sit down, he says, "I've been to see my lawyer, and I want you to know that you don't have to worry about my funeral. It won't cost you anything. The Navy will cremate me for free and scatter the ashes at sea. What looks good on the menu?" And I can't answer because I am stunned, gobsmacked. And I don't even know why I'm stunned. And what I come up with is that my father has occupied my consciousness so completely and for so long that I've never really imagined a time when he wouldn't be there. I mean, you know, I know the hairy thunderer of my youth is long gone, but it's only now that I see the guy he left behind. And that guy is this unassuming, friendly guy in his 70s, slightly stooped, arthritis in one knee, lapels that went out of style 20 years ago. And suddenly, and for the first time in my life, I feel protective of my father. And suddenly, and for the first time in my life, I stand up to my father. And what I hear myself say is this: no, I don't want the Navy to scatter your ashes. I'll scatter your ashes. The Navy's not your son. I'm your son. I'm your son. Thank you.